And also just welcome to everyone, this beautiful group. All of us having had, most everyone in the group having had a deep experience of the Council on the Uncertain Human Future, and which is a process, as I've told you, Bayo, of leaning into the cracks. And so we're so grateful to you for helping us explore that further, this beautiful metaphor that you've shared so widely. And I just know how grateful all of us are. We've spent, a lot of people in this group have spent a good amount of time with your writing, and with the other ways we can join you online. I was going to say, somehow your writing is like a spaceship in itself. And, you know, I know that that meant a lot, the spaceships meant a lot to you as a young person. And also just your empathetic presence, you somehow have opened up, and in your joining us on this journey, you stay with us into the cracks. So I do have a kind of official intro I want to share, that simply that your perspectives and your practices are so erudite and abundant, international, often playful, clearly planetary and visionary. So all of the above, and yet all grounded in your Yoruba roots, I would say. I mean, I feel you can say more. And yes, you are a trickster, and an extraordinary scholar, and a poetic storyteller. But from my perspective, you're at the heart, you are a seer, and you are a wise elder. You are Isu, this benevolent messenger for this time. Thank you. Thank you. So you're calling us, you're calling, and you're being with us into our circumstance, this breakdown of modernity and our fugitive condition within it. And so my question as we launch to you is really that one that you did raise with the Pacifica grads a while ago, which is, what do we do at the end of the world? You know, we're living into this dissolution, and as we do that together, we turn to each other and to you and to Isu, and we ask, you know, what's possible here? What's asked of us? What does Isu counsel now?
Thank you so much, Sarah, and good evening. It's evening. It's almost morning in India, just 1 hour away from being morning. I am really humbled by the invitation to speak with you and to listen with you. And I thank you for having me. What I'm saying, or what I say, isn't sourced from an already complete place, right? And then dropped in. That's too hegemonic for me. It's more a playful, speculative, poetic touching of ecologies and possibilities and immediacies. And I hope that I hope what I say elicits a playful response from you as well. I hope that you do not reduce this to the poverty of truth, right? To think of this as, is that true, would be to abuse the things that I feel inspired to talk about. So I'm hearing an echo of my voice, which is fine. Bodies are ecstatic and beside themselves. So let's go ahead with it. But I feel invited to stay with this question in this way, by first noticing that death requires a different cosmology, right? There is a way we have learned to speak about death that evokes a sense of finality. And that is, of course, tethered to modernity's infatuation with the isolated individual, right? It's the way we premise being, it's the way we understand time, it's the way we situate ownership and property and identity and futures and pasts and development and biology. We think in terms of the dissociated, atomized, pixelated individual, right? So that death becomes this terrible finality of things, becomes this end that is so abrupt that you would think that in a world, in a universe that is constantly rhizomatic, constantly departing from itself, constantly doing things that language does not have a way to embrace, you would think that our imaginations of death would change, but that's not the case, because we're imbricated within cities, and the architecture of our surroundings, of suburbia, teaches us that we are isolated, and we are on a trajectory that begins with birth and transits to the heady teenage years and goes into the middle-aged, the middle years, and then to elderhood, and then death. But I don't come from a world that sees development in these ways. I come from a world that thinks of time as slushy, right? Not even linear, not even cyclical, because I think cyclicity is another form of linearity, right? It's still proceeding from one direction and heading to another direction. Slushy time is chronofeminist. It's the idea that there isn't there isn't an imperial march from the past to the future, that time is secreted in bodily, corporeal, or to borrow the word of Stacia Limo, transcorporeal relationships. So that I've come to begin to think about death as becoming diasporic, as a cartography, a choreography that marks the errancy of bodies. And I'll speak to how that links up with leaning into the cracks shortly. But let me story this response to your beautiful question in this way. There is the tale. It was originally written by Femi Yuba. Femi Yuba is a playwright, and Femi Yuba is, I think he's still alive. He wrote this story of Eshu, the trickster. Eshu is in Yoruba indigenous cosmology, a Loki-like figure, plays and dances and does wild things. Well, in this story, when the slave ships came, a particular god named Ogun, who is the god of victory, and that's the kind of god you want to send into battle, right? He's the god of victory. He's the god of metal and victory. He mounts up an insurgency against the invaders. He calls his people together and says, let's go. Let's chase them away from our shores. On the way, he is intercepted by his brother, Eshu the trickster. And Eshu tells him to calm down, slow down a bit. Let's just discuss strategy before we chase them away. While Ogun is not looking, Eshu slips this heavily alcoholic palm wine into his drink and sends Ogun to sleep, so that the war is delayed and victory is postponed indefinitely. And Eshu proceeds to steal into the slave ships, and he travels with the slaves across the Atlantic. when I heard that story for the first time, my face was exactly like Linda's. Like, I don't know if you can see Linda's face, but it's very like, why not just, I mean, come on, why not just chase them away? Why allow that? So she stood out as the villain of the story. And, you know, I wanted to understand why do this? And I came to some kind of appreciation of this act, that sometimes when things become stuck, you need the trickster to open up and cleave apart new opportunities for worlding projects, right? We often speak about morality and ethics. I distinguish morality from ethics in this way. Ethics is the flow, the ontological, epistemological flow that creates things. Morality is the stability of those flows, right? So we create moral structures. We speak about the permanence of things and transcendence and good and evil. But those things are not permanent markers of the ground or territories. They're constantly moving and spilling, right? So the ethical becomingness of things is what I think about as ethical onto-epistemology, along the lines of my dear friend Karen Barad. Issue seems to be this ethical crack, this opening that suggests that if we're stuck too long within our moral economies, then we will start to create and deepen and reinforce the suffering of that space, right? So that it speaks to politics of today. We're stuck in our politics today. The right is behaving, or the left is behaving like the right, and the right is behaving like the left. And I think this is largely true, especially in the United States, right? It seems there's some kind of I might use the archetypal phrasing of the Samantha, Samutha Mandran, I think I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's this Hindu mythology of good versus evil co-creating each other because they're stuck in an ocean of curds. It's a long story. I'm not about to get into that. It has dragons and everything, but it seems today we're stuck politically. We don't know where to go. Justice doesn't know what to do, right? In fact, justice has learned to cultivate this habit of kneeling on necks of minorities. So when justice kneels on your neck, then where else to go? What else to do? I think the trickster is burdened with the question of world building. And so the trickster is the familiar villain of the story, but it's also producing other kinds of realities, creolized promiscuities, possibilities that are too exquisite for the status quo to lean into or to understand. What I'm trying to communicate here is that we need a world end, but not the modern notion of a world ending, not the Hollywoodized apocalyptic visions of smoke and lava and terminal points. I speak of world endings as transitions, literally the transmission of a property. We need a way of understanding that we have never been human in a final sense. The project of the Enlightenment is hollowing out, and I think we're being invited to give up the property of self-enclosed permanence and individuality. And in a sense, this is what Issue archetypally did by moving with the slaves to disrupt the world, to creolize it, to make it stranger than it was, right? How many of you know that the Washington, is it called the Washington Monument? That phallic structure, and that is a symbol of power, right? there is a historical account that links it up to the monoliths in ancient Kemet, Egypt, right? Those obelisks and monoliths and phallic things in ancient Kemet are said to be, and forgive my indelicacy, but that's why you invited me, are said to be the erect penis of Eshu. Eshu is all about penises. His head is a penis, his body is a penis, and that's how he feminizes everything, right? He disturbs the boundaries of things. He breaks through binaries. This is what tricksters do well, right? So the Washington Monument is a Yoruba figure, is what I'm trying to say. We're already there. So to your question, Sarah, about what to do at the end of the world, I think the thing to do is to travel. And that might seem impractical. I think the thing to do is to leave the fascism of life and to allow ourselves to touch and be touched by the promiscuities that are already involved when we speak about life as if it were a category unto itself. I'm speaking about life being already dotted and struck through and interwoven and haunted by death. Death doesn't happen at the end of life. Life is a dying well, right? Eshu traveled with the slaves in order to create new worlds, in order to create deathscapes, in order to invite new bodies to sprout. And this is a spillage, an excessive spillage that exceeds our modern ideas of how things end and begin. We are needing at this point to create a politics that is sensitive to endings. You all know, I think, that Jacinda, the leader of New Zealand, ended her leadership. And I just had a conversation with some people a while ago. I was saying to myself, why did she really end her leadership? What's the real reason? And I caught myself thinking that way, right? That why does there need to be some conspiratorial background reason? Why not just appreciate the fact that things end and things need to transit and things close? Acknowledging that I'm limited and I'm out of steam and out of whack and I want to do something else doesn't seem like a neurotypical thing to do, because it seems we're constantly committed to continuity, the convenience of permanence, building towers for eternity. In fact, our notions of social transformation are premised on infinity, right? And I think this invitation to stray away from the algorithms of permanence, even if it means moving away from community, just like the ant that has been possessed by Ophiocodiceps unilateralis, the fungal entity, moves away from the ant colony and becomes a satellite for fungal expansion. We are being possessed and haunted today within modern assemblages. And our work, maybe the kind of politics we want to evoke today, is to be hospitable to these visitors, is to play host, to be good hosts, to open our homes to these passers-by, right? And not to close and shut the doors, because that imperviousness is actually at the heart of the Anthropocene, is the heart of global warming, is the heart of racial injustice, is at the heart of the things that we're struggling with. It's our denied indebtedness to a world of becomings that is creating the heat around us. So we need a break. And Eshu exploited that break. He did not close it up like Ogun would have wanted to do with victory, right? He did not renounce the break, the crack. He exploited a crack because newness and novelty comes with staying and leaning into them. Let me shut up for now and maybe wait with another question.
Thank you. As you're speaking about the crack, I think of throughout your work how you speak of these liminal spaces as charged, as sacred. I mean, this is really the history of human understanding. We have seen that thresholds, that portals,
Yeah.
cracks are the places beyond duality, right? And where the sacred comes through. So you seem to be saying that's the time that we're in.
Yes. Yes.
In the
Yeah,
back.
I'm speaking about it might be helpful to contrast between what I'm now learning to call the Afro scene, and that has a long story to it, and the public. Our normal conception of everyday life is that we are individual selves and we are Cartesian selves, Newtonian selves, and our work is to navigate the public order, which is shorn and cleansed of intermingling ghosts and gods and pagan spirits. The social contract of modernity is, Sarah, you're free to go. You're free to build a parking lot where this mountain once stood. It's okay. Smooth sailing from here, I think, is the American expression, right? It's smooth sailing from here. You can do anything. That is the public, the algorithm of the clearing. In the words of my sister Erin Manning, the clearing, the fishbowl, right? That thinks about privileges and stable identities and bordered corporealities. That is the idea. But when we start to consider that we are not as well put together as we think, a fact that I know too well as a recovering psychologist, then we can start to speak about intensities and thresholds, that there is a haunted public instead of a cleansed public, that all around us in furniture, like James Hillman, the archetypal psychologist, would have said, is the anima mundi. It's ghosts and goddesses and bacteria, especially bacteria, right? The pandemic reminds us that a public is not as clean as we think it is. There's no hygienic outside, right? The outside is already inside, right? And so navigating these thresholds means that we cannot depend on our rectilinearity anymore, that we have to learn to dance the haughty, noble posture of the upright man is being composted. And now we have to learn to duck, to bend, to prostrate ourselves in places that we wouldn't have wanted to do that. And I want to offer some psychological urgency to this. You know, I learned from, well, I later learned that Freud wasn't actually so big on the interpretation of dreams, right? What he really wanted to study, but did not find permission to do so, was the transference of thought. It was not permitted to do that at that time. He was really intrigued about how minds communicate without communicating. Maybe I can transfer a thought to you, Sarah. You know, he was intrigued by that. But I learned from Western psychology, and I learned how to think about emotions and feelings and affective states as within the body. Right? These days, I'm questioning my training, hence my recovering, which is an ongoing process. I'm questioning the idea that we are isolated and that we have emotions. Instead, I'm noticing that emotions have us. Emotions are territorial. When we speak about depression, for instance, it's not that we have depression. It's that depression is a nexus point, a territorial figure that enlists bodies in how it comes to matter, right? It's that there's an ongoingness to this that is more than human, right? That our languages and our disciplinarity does not know how to name, right? That maybe when a seed drops into the earth in Beijing, and I'm using some trope from quantum physics, maybe when a worm dies in the ground, I feel the grief of that. And I'm not able to explain it, but the therapeutic alliance situates all those tensions and puts it in me, because that's all it knows how to do, right? So when I speak about cracks, I'm speaking about not something that is far away, something that is on the roadside, something that is coming along like justice. I'm speaking about what we as moderns are constantly experiencing, but performatively invisibilizing. We're constantly denying that we are monstrous. We're constantly denying that we're haunted and exposed. And we know how to do this well because the furniture around us encourages us to think that way. That you and I right now are hyphenated, but we don't know how to think about that. I'm speaking these things and I'm impressed and oriented and moved and influenced in subtle molecular ways by the movements on your face, by the textures of your space that I may not be able to voice, right? So we're not molar beings, using the language of Deleuze, we are molecular becomings. And this is what a crack is. Cracks mark the spaces of our monstrosity. It says, and by monster here, I don't mean Disney. I don't mean a Disney flick. I don't mean the monster of Hollywood. I mean the monster not as a thing, but as a how. Monsters are hows. The monstrous is a how. Is how bodies are critiqued by the flows of the world. How the forms we've assumed are constantly being underwhelmed or taken to task and called into question by a world that exceeds those forms. So that it seems that we are in a crisis of form today. But I digress, and I think I've traipsed too far away from what your concern is, Sarah.
Well, not at all. But I would add that it can also, the monstrous can come as magic and wonder. And
yes, that is the monstrous.
Just that the interdependence that you're speaking of, that we are all one, and that it is light and dark both at once. And these spaces out of which insight into that emerges. And we are very much in one of those.
Yes.
So let's move into that magic of the three guests that I mentioned to you earlier, that I surprised Bayo with the fact that we have Willa Baker, Lama Willa Baker with us, and Alnoor Ladha and Mary Evelyn Tucker are all going to share. I hope Alnoor is here.
I don't see Alnoor, Sarah. Alnoor, if you're here under a different name and I'm missing you, please speak up.
I heard from him this morning, so that's too bad.
It must be that tech thing again.
You know what? Actually,
oh, here Alnoor is right here. Look at that. Wow.
Okay.
I thought you ran away, Alnoor. Alnoor is my brother.
I know. It's just to have all of you here. So hopefully Lily can get him spotlighted as well. Is he coming through, Lily? Looks like he's there, maybe not. Yeah.
I see him. Maybe he's on audio only. So
yeah, it's not letting me add a spotlight for Alnoor right now, Sarah. So maybe we'll just start and I'll add him if I can do it.
So there he is.
There he is. Welcome, Alnoor.
I'm sorry I'm late. I was trying to get to the airport early. Always late. I was trying to get here early so I could hear you all, and then internet connection. But I'm on now.
Yay.
Did I miss Bayo? Did I miss your?
You missed Bayo, but you know Bayo, so I think you're going to be fine. What I had said to each of you, I'm so glad you're here, is to just share a question, and if each of you could just offer something relatively brief, and we'll just pool that. And Bayo, you can respond as you choose to what you've heard.
After,
yeah.
Okay.
Willa, if you can start, and then Mary Evelyn, and then Alnoor can can be the last one. So welcome, Willa.
Thank you. And so nice to meet you, Bayo. I've heard so much about you and read your articles, and am very inspired by your voice and by the Yoruba roots that you channel. Really inspiring.
Thank you.
My ears really perked up when you started talking about the trickster archetype issue in the Yoruba culture. And it's an equivalent in the Tibetan culture. This yogi named Drukpa Kunli, who same thing, the penis is a really big thing in his narratives and his humor, and also very much about causing trouble and about upending the status quo. And so I wondered if you could just, for our benefit, for my benefit, or for our benefit, unpack a little how the trickster archetype could inspire us in how we dance with an issue as enormous as climate change, and how we are our human actions are implicated in that that grand disintegration. And I wondered if you could just reflecting a little more on that trickster archetype, and maybe more broadly, how we think about ourselves, how we think about who we are as humans matter in the face of this crisis. I think it matters so much, and I'm wondering how you would see that too. Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We should get them all, Bayo.
Okay, I'll get them all. Okay.
Except
Alnoor's. We can skip Alnoor's.
Mary Evelyn, please.
Hello, Mary. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. And every time I listen to you, I learn something new. But I'm very aware of the cracks because I've cracked both my wrists.
Oh my God.
And so if I'm flashing white around, that's why. But Bayo, what strikes me is a number of years ago, a Chinese professor, Du Weiming, wrote a very powerful essay, Beyond the Enlightenment Mentality, which is really what you're speaking to, about evoking something beyond the Enlightenment mentality, which has become such a crushing worldview that people can't see beyond it. So that's the basis of my question, because I left the United States in the late 60s because of that feeling and the politics and so on, to go to Asia to study Asian religions. And it was there that I felt I escaped that, because the religions, as you know, of Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism, especially of East Asia, have a tremendous sense of interdependence, of relationality, and most of all, because I studied Confucianism especially, of qi, of the dynamic vital force in all reality. And so this is animate. This is the anima mundi. And so, you know, when we take the fact that almost a quarter of the world's, well, at least a quarter of the world's people are from Asia, you know, from East Asia especially, this notion is not foreign whatsoever. In fact, it is a vital and vibrant understanding why Qigong and Tai Chi and these arts are restoring Qi for people and all over China, et cetera. So anyway, I'm simply saying, in addition to the indigenous traditions that John has studied and you know so well, and so on, these worldviews are implanted in great complex cultures and civilizations that are still trying to bring them forth, and they're present in the West. So I think those are things that we can draw on with for health of human health and health of the planet. And my final point is, all of that, I think we are absolutely burgeoning with a sense of the sentience of the natural world, with animal behaviors, understandings, with plant and forest communications and so on, absolutely burgeoning. So
Yes.
I think there's no question that what you're saying is simply going to flourish even more. And I thank you for what you're opening up for so many people.
Thank you, Mira. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Alnoor,
Alnoor.
I hope he's not frozen. He looks a
He-
little
he's
frozen.
Petrified.
Alnoor, are you there? Maybe not. We may have lost him. Well, Bayo, why don't you go ahead then?
I'll respond. Yes. Wait. Oh, he's gone now. Thank you so much for these instigations, and I feel almost paralyzed by the multiplicities of directions I can take in response to them. But I would take one in this rhizome that is emerging. And what I heard from you, Willa, is, you said something about tricksters causing trouble. And I framed the question around that simultaneously responds to the universe of questions that you framed. And that is, do tricksters cause trouble? Let me put it this way, that Brazil, Qatar, just recently hosted the World Cup, right? Before Qatar, Brazil, I think it was Russia, and before Russia, then Brazil. Brazil at some point in the 2000s hosted the World Cup and the Olympics. Whatever your arguments about World Cup hosting are, the point is something different. When they took on this task of hosting the World Cup, they decided to refurbish their cities, to give them a new face. One of those things that they did was to start digging in Rio de Janeiro, in a very, very popular part of the city called Cais do Valongo, right? And they started digging, and tractors were working, and all of a sudden they uprooted bones. And I don't know if you know the story. Walter might know the story. Sarah might know the story. I speak about this frequently. They uprooted the bones of slaves that were transported across the Atlantic and died along the way because they did not make it that far into the plantations. And so most of them who arrived at that port, or some of them who arrived at the port and were too sick to continue, died or were killed because they became useless. And when they died, they were not given proper burials. They were squeezed and stuffed into some part of the city and lived and left to rot with broken pottery and stuff like that. And so their bones became subterranean, right? They just lived beneath the surface of things. And an emperor, a young emperor with post-racial aspirations, built a society on those bones. And think about the irony and the play in that. He wanted to build a society where everyone was welcome. And so he built justice, concretized justice, layering all of that on those bones, especially to welcome a bride that he was bringing in from Europe. But that's a longer story. I point this out to notice this, and this is in part quantum physics, is in part what Mary is already saying about entanglement. It's that everything embodied produces tensions that exceed it, right? Everything that lives is already a concatenation of trouble, right? Nothing lives by itself. Anything that becomes with. Everything that acts with. I've just written an essay called Black Lives Matter, but to whom? And I make very provocative statements like Black Lives Matter and its counter argument, White Lives Matter, which is mounted up to push Black Lives Matter down, are the same argument within the same intensity, within the same world building project. I may not go further than that, except to invite you to read the 52-page essay. But I will say this, that nothing exists without tensions, without trouble. The trickster's work is not to cause trouble, it's to expose the tensions that are already there with all your world building. That when you claim, for instance, to be modern, look at your modernity. Look at the wilds your modernity is constantly and simultaneously producing. When you claim, for instance, to be white, look at the tensions laden in that claim of identification. There are stories of issue. Walking down the street, well, prior to that, he observed two lovers claiming eternity and vowing to love each other for all time. This is the thing with tricksters. Don't be so confident about yourself or your claims before a trickster, because a trickster's task is to upset, is to show you the trouble that is already implicated in your claims to exclusivity, right? So the lovers are like Romeo and Juliet vowing themselves to each other, and they retreat summarily to their villages, right? Which is just neighboring houses divided by a single road. Eshu observes everything, and then he decides on an experiment. He paints himself white and black, right? And he walks down the street, says nothing, just walks down the street. And on the other side, watches what happens. The neighbors greet each other when they come out in the morning, and someone says, "Hey, did you see that black man walk down the street?" And the other person said, "Obviously not. That was a white person," right? They said, "No, that was a black person," and it erupts into war, a battle, and they kill each other. End of story. Sorry, Yoruba stories do not end with a happily ever after. There were very grim accounts of tricksters playing tricks on people. Well, what I'm trying to pass across here or share here is that tricksters don't cause trouble per se. Tricksters open up the trouble that is already there. And that goes to what you're saying about the issue of climate chaos. I don't like to use climate change for reasons that go beyond our conversation, but climate chaos seems to be the tensions, the intensities that being human produces, right? The humanity being a colonial field of becomings, right? That bodies are constantly imported into this space we call the human. And what it produces is a worlding, terraforming project that has trouble everywhere around it. What issue might be doing with climate chaos, with cracks, with the cracks of uncertainty, is introducing us to the trouble that is already implicated when we claim to be individuals, when we claim to be citizen subjects. He's saying, look, this is your humanity. This is you. This is your permanence. This is your infinity. This is your social transformation. This is justice. That at some subterranean level, we are quite removed from the tensions and the bones that have subsidized our lives. Now we're being introduced to those debts. We're being brought to the face of it. The thing to do is not to run away from the trouble. The thing to do is to eat the trouble, is to eat it all up, is to eat the trauma, right? That's what leaning into the cracks means. It means staying with the monster. It means having a picnic with your monsters. It means losing one's way long enough, as our elders would say, to find new questions, right? So that is the invitation of the trickster, is when things get stuck, then I invite you to play. The trouble is not an accusation of sin. That's too Christocentric. We're not dealing with sin and original sin. We're not dealing with individuals gone awry. You know, we're not dealing with any of that. We're dealing with patterns and relationships and algorithms. And the trickster is the invitation to errancy, to lose our way. And that happens with touching our cracks, naming and being with our monstrosity. As I will share in a story about Deligny and a French visionary who worked with autism later on. I will do that later on, yes.
Well, let's get Alnoor.
Alnoor.
He is here. Alnoor.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm sorry I'm late. And yeah, it's beautiful to be with everyone. Take exception with Bayo. And
Alnoor, you should tell people why we do this. We're every public space we meet each other, we have to prank each other. That's the thing. So
and Bayo talks about the trickster, but then when I'm late, you can't allow the trickster in, right?
You're twice late today.
Twice late. Yeah, you know, I'm going to punt a question to you, Bayo, that I often get, which is when you talk about the edge or the cracks or trickster consciousness, there's an ontological shift that is being asked of us.
Yeah.
Right. The very gaze by which we see the world, about how we internalize what is a problem.
Yes.
We internalize what is ours to do. And the question is, like, how does one go about doing that? Like, it seems like there's almost practice required to enter the consciousness of the crack or the consciousness of the trickster.
Yes. Thank you, brother. It's the same question we're asking, right? It's our playfulness. It's our inquiry. And I appreciate that. I want to say something first about my dear sister Mary's comments. And I met Mary for the first time in Denmark, right? We had a marriage ceremony. We attended a marriage ceremony. I think Andrea is here, where Andrea and you and others created this scene. And it was such a playful enactment in a serious convention about climate collapse. And we were playing outside. And I will never forget that. I deeply appreciate those moments. And what you say, of course, about this having a prestigious legacy, entanglement is not new. If it's new, it's already old. If it's old, it's probably new, right? And this is probably the trouble with speaking about something so relational. It's not new to say the things we're saying and exploring today. But there is some urgency about saying it. There is some urgency about naming the ways that we have been co-opted, appropriated, and incarcerated within a worlding process, right? That really calls for us to think well. I want to emphasize thinking well about how to lose our way, right? It's the question about the fishbowl. If we are, and I tend to think of whiteness as a fishbowl. And by whiteness, I don't mean white people. That's another form of whiteness, to reduce a worlding process to identity. You know, that's what whiteness knows how to do well. When I speak about whiteness, I'm speaking about this terraforming, partitioning, this apartheid, this ontological apartheid that wants people to be in their place. That is an arrangement of human and non-human bodies, right? The fishbowl is this modernity that arranges us. Some bodies get the plastic castle and some bodies agitate, you know, for the plastic castle. But the thing is that we're all trapped in this ontological space. And the thing to do is to exile it, to exile it. And the only way that I know, Mary, I don't know if you're thinking along the lines already, I'm thinking about how do fish leave the bowl? By dying. by dying. That's the only way that a hand plucks itself, you know, into the water and pulls it out. Except again, dying here is not the impoverished ways that modernity thinks about it. Dying is, or demise, which is etymologically the transference of property, right? The dying well we need to do is to start to listen to a world that is fabulously, vitally, and mystically alive. And if we can frame a politics around that, practically, I think we are inching closer to new ways of being in the world. And this brings me to Alnoor's question. Alnoor, what are you eating, for crying out loud?
Vegetables involved. You wouldn't be interested.
Vegetables. I don't know what the concept means, but you know, the question is really about how do we frame a politics that brings us to the edges. And this is what I think of as cracks. There's a philosopher, he's not as famous as he should be, that speaks about trans-individual flows, Gilbert Simondon, right? He speaks about the pre-individual. And he spoke about the fact that we're not individuals, we're individuations, right? When I think about edges and cracks, I think about Simondon, I think about flows. I think about the gift of openings. I think about issue. And I also think about Delini. And I think we've had a conversation about this, Alnoor, that in order to address the fascism of the asylum in post-World War II France, Delini started renegade visionary communities that sought to bring, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, even though that's a dangerous story, sought to bring out non-verbal autistic kids into communities of practice. What he did wasn't an attempt to rehabilitate those kids, to medicalize them, to teach them a new way. He wanted to attend to them, to trace and accompany them. I think the politics of our time, the politics that we're being invited to pursue, is a tracing, is an accompaniment of the so-called monstrous. It might look like an autistic politics. It will look like losing our way, but it's definitely a carnivalesque sensorial invitation to listen along the way, right? And I'm learning to frame that as a method. Well, I don't want to say a method, that's too sterile, too clinical. But I think of it as making sanctuary, or chiasmography. Chiasmography or chiasmography, that is tracing the cracks. How do we learn to listen to monstrosity? How do we learn to follow it instead of rehabilitating it? So I'm naming here the traps of inclusivity, right? How, for instance, Black bodies in the United States are constantly invited to occupy the center, a seat of power. Like, come, here's a seat for you. But there's something seditiously dangerous about that. It's like occupying the center on the Titanic isn't exactly where you want to be. You know, having an equal piece of a carcinogenic pie isn't exactly equity. So I think inclusivity politics, as needed as it is, in some way gets in the way of the kind of transformations we're seeking. What we want is not inclusion or exclusion, it's exploration, it's experimentation, it's festival, it's dance, it's creolized promiscuities. It's Alnoor eating vegetables on a Zoom call. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for straying away from power to find other places of power. Yeah.
Bayo, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Willa, Mary, Evelyn, Alnoor, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Bayo, before we actually let you go to sleep?
Oh, okay.
In the middle of the night in India.
I was thinking about, well, I have a question here from Susie about tracing. How do we be with these cracks without domesticating them and colonizing them again? Is such a precious question to ask. There is no guarantee that we won't colonize cracks again, because we know how to do that. We do it all the time. We heal, and then we call healing, or what we call healing is often a dragging back into the image of the familiar, right? Just like Ogun is constantly hating his brother for straying away from the pantheon, right? There are no guarantees that we won't drag that back. But maybe there is the humility that comes with knowing that we can only do our best, and in staying with some caution in attending to those moments. And it is not entirely left to us to create novelty or transformation. We are not the agents of change modernity makes us out to be, right? It's not left to Alnoor, especially Alnoor. It's not left to Alnoor. It's not left to us. You know, it's a gift of opportunity, of opening, of cracks, right? So I think all we can do is, like my wife did when I failed to do it. This might be a good way to wrap things up. As most people that I share with know, my son is on the autistic spectrum, and we are creating an adventure, my wife and I, called Broken Compass, which is about following autistic children, not rehabilitating them, in the spirit of Delhi. We're doing it here in India. But that took inspiration from some work that my wife did one day in the shopping mall. I was with my son, and I've made it quite public that I struggled with his autism. Again, language fails me. It's not even his autism, right? It doesn't belong to him. That's the property way of seeing things, right? Within the dynamics of ownership. No, autism is a field of intensity, and it enlists all kinds of bodies, including those that are not diagnostically autistic, right? Yes, I've shared this many times that I struggled with this situation. I, in spite of my theoretical training in this, I felt my son was a shadow of what he could have been if he wasn't born with autism, right? And something deeply subconscious wanted to fix him. I wanted to fix him. I wanted to make him right. I was like Geppetto in the Carlo Collodi story of Pinocchio, right? I was praying for my boy to become a real boy, right? Without knowing. In spite of my politics, in spite of my public facing persona, this was happening, my demons, so to speak. And one day we were walking in the shopping mall. My daughter, who's 9, my son, he's 5 now, but then he was 3 or so. And he had a moment of overwhelm, and he fell to the ground. I was trained to call it a meltdown. My wife calls it a space of worship. Mm-hmm. And I really understood what that meant when something happened. I tried to get my son back to order. And this is what Susie is saying, colonizing the crack, bringing it back to the familiar, insisting on rational continuity, insisting on neurotypicality, the fascistic requirement that it looks like me, right? And I held him, and I said something to the effect of, get yourself together, man, you know, because I don't like being publicly embarrassed, right? Of a trait I share with Alnoor, by the way. I wasn't succeeding. None of this was going well. And my wife observed, and she walked right to me and said, walk away, walk away. And she's the boss, and she's more intelligent than I will ever be. And I walked away. She knew I wasn't the right person for that moment. And she proceeded to lay herself flat on the ground by the side of my son, not a word spoken, just by his side. Everyone in the shopping mall walking by, wondering what was happening. And she just was quiet with him there. And I think that is the kind of politics that we need today, staying by the side of the supposedly injured, right? A politics that dedicates itself to the perpetual salvation of the minoritarian subject, will continue to produce the minoritarian subject. A politics that is premised on exclusivity versus inclusivity will just keep on churning out excluded subjects and perpetually offended subjects, right? So we cannot build a politics on saving subject X, right? Which is the basis of cancel culture. We cannot build our politics on that. We need a politics that goes beyond critique, that creates in seemingly ordinary moments, like lying down on the ground in a shopping mall and just being quiet while a prophet prophesies. And that is what the politics looks for me practically. Sorry, it doesn't look like a logo. It doesn't look like an organization. It doesn't look like a platform. It may not seem like a manifesto, but that's the politics I'm after. It doesn't seem neurotypical or monumental. It's ordinary and generous, and yet it invites us to fail, to fall to the ground, to dance, to do strange things in public spaces. That's the politics I'm after. And now I'm hungry because I'm watching my brother eat vegetables.
Bayo, just please keep swimming with us in this. Thank you. Thank you for all that you share with us and how you open these spaces for us.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you.
And we will see you before long.
Yes.
Travel
Thank
safe with all you're
I
dealing
will.
with. Yeah.
I will. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. And I'm especially happy because this is the first time Alnoor is doing this to me and not pranking me as I leave. Love you all. Thank you so much for having
It was
me.
for Sarah, but you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.